time. I'm not quite sure yet whether I'm live. There's always a bit of a delay between when you think you are and where you're not. So I'll keep talking for now, and then hopefully I'll connect with some of you lovely people soon. Please let me know if you can see me, so that way I can make sure that I can see you. Just doing things, checking a few of the settings. Oh, there we go. I can see myself on here. I can't see anyone else yet, but maybe you are coming. It takes a little bit of time sometimes. So thank you all for joining me. I was inspired to do this session because, you know, as a solo entrepreneur starting out in business, you know, money has never been tighter and things have never been more difficult, but also it is such an exciting time because we're living in an unprecedented time of disruption with a lot of things going digital. And I am actually quite optimistic for my future. I have to remind myself that a few times, but I am actually very, very optimistic about things that are happening ahead. And some of you may have read, I had an article in Money Magazine that was published, I think the week before last. I keep getting asked about from people I used to work with or other people who are in stable public service jobs whether I have any regrets about having quit my very stable and successful public service career, working in the Department of Foreign Affairs and Trade in diplomacy. Amanda, hi, thank you so much for letting me know that you're there. But yes, whether I had any regrets of having my last day at work being 31st of October, and since then we've had bushfires and now we've had pandemics and we've had all sorts of stuff. Did I have any regrets? And the short answer is no, I don't have any regrets. I feel a lot happier than I have in a long time and a lot more aligned with my values and my why. Has it been financially easy for me? Not always. As I said in the article, I had all these things that I had lined up, plan A, B, C, and D pretty much, and all of that fell out with everything that has happened this year. But still, that has meant that I've pivoted and I've moved to new ways. So that was kind of, I guess, the catalyst for this. And I also want to mention now, and I'll mention at the end too, that I have my next 6 weeks to abundance with the Joyful Frugalista course starting on the 3rd of August. So it costs $250 for 6 weeks, and I do have a special deal of $200 for people on this with the code Frugalista. And I'll put details in this chat afterwards. And one of the weeks on that session is all about careers, side hustles, and following your dream, and exploring about what is holding us back in terms of our limiting beliefs that are helping us to, or preventing us from getting true abundance in what we do and what we work. And I'm seeing an increasing trend of women in particular who are going out in business to do things that are more aligned with themselves. So I'm quite, I think this is a really interesting thing that a lot of people are doing, not just for themselves, but because they have a desire to help other people more broadly. And so the question then is, how do you make it happen? So I have identified 10 tips that I think could be helpful. Number 1, save up first. Before you make the jump and do what I did and quit your job, make sure you've got some savings behind you. Now, I had a lot of plans in place, like I mentioned. I had freelance writing that I was already doing. I published a book. I've been approached for some paid and unpaid public speaking opportunities. And of course, with COVID, a lot of those things disappeared. So I had to find new models, new business models, and I had to do those fast. Now, it hasn't been an issue because we saved up first. And I'm trying to pinpoint the exact time when this happened. And I think what happened was after I came back from my honeymoon in October 2018. And it had been such a horrendous process to actually get the time for the honeymoon, even though I booked the cruise a year before and got approved leave the year before. It was still constantly, like nearly, you know, I think 3 times I had to go back to IT and get it approved to my director. That leave had in fact been approved, even though it had been on everyone's schedule and everyone's list. I was doing work on the cruise ship. I came back to a mess. It was just so stressful. And I think at that point, I looked at my new husband and went, look, really? I need to get out of this. This is just crazy that I'm feeling guilty about going on my own honeymoon. This is just not right on so many levels. And so we'd been saving quite aggressively before then, but we really started. And so that was really probably about a year out before I made the decision, really saving and investing. And we were in a very good financial situation, and we've proven that we can really live on one salary while I'm in the startup phase anyway. Hi, Anne. Thank you so much for dropping by. I really appreciate it. So that's kind of tip number one. And tip number two is try where possible to build up a side hustle first. Now, we are living in difficult times, and as you've seen, my side hustle that I built up didn't quite work out. I had a lovely message recently on Instagram from a lady who had built up a side hustle that she was doing in addition to her corporate job, and she was doing that very successfully, so successfully that around the same time I did, she took the leap of faith and quit her corporate job to go into her side hustle. And because of COVID, that whole industry has pretty much shut down. And she's in Victoria as well. I think from memory she's in Melbourne. So you can imagine it's really, really, really shut down. So sometimes that doesn't work, which is why you also need to sign, to have some savings in place. But really do try and have, some idea of testing your concept before you make the big plunge to do things. It can be difficult in terms of time management. You can feel very stretched. Side hustle is not for everyone, and I talk about this in my course. Don't feel guilted into doing a side hustle. Hello, lovely Patricia. But if you are trying to test to see whether this is something you want to do and to learn more about it, it's a really good way of bridging rather than just jumping off into the unknown. My third tip is don't let the allure of being a business in business or being an entrepreneur go to your head. Now, I once had a good conversation over dinner with a very successful multi-million-dollar entrepreneur based here in Canberra, and I won't mention who he is because it was said in confidence. But he said that he does not like the term entrepreneur. He does not like to use it. Hi, Jackie. Good to see you here. He refuses to pretty much fund anyone who uses the terms. Now, what's wrong with the term? Well, I think it's come from French English, and, sometimes in the royal household they don't use French English. Long political history, but that is not the reason. The reason is that some people get very addicted to I'm an entrepreneur, I'm in business, and they sort of get caught up in all that kind of hype about that, and they lose sense of the day-to-day, the dollars and cents coming in and out of their business, the actual steps that are needed to get there. And I don't know if anyone's had any experience going through the startup world. I've had a little bit. It can get really, really like big money being talked in terms of, investors, big things happening, lots of buzz, and you do really get addicted to that. Now, in a sense, it's not so bad, liking what you do and feeling proud of what you do and feeling that you want to tell the world about what you do. The issue is when you're like, well, I'm going to be, a six-figure entrepreneur, or I'm going to be a multi-million-dollar, entrepreneur, and I'm a startup, and you go spending lots of money in anticipation of the money that is going to happen. I've seen that a lot, and it is so easy. It's like, well, I've got a new business and I need things. There's me who's just recently got some business mugs, which I got through Vistaprint, and they were very cheap, by the way, and came off some of the other money I had saved, but I did feel a little bit guilty about spending, I think it was $10 on those. But it is so easy to get into that sort of sense of, well, I'm a business owner, so I need a new desk, and I need a new computer, and I need new mugs, and I need new fancy business cards with, extra special paper and extra special gloss and extra special things. Or I need a new car because I've got a new business. I mean, if you genuinely need a new car and you need new business cards and you need new mugs, well, that's fine. But don't let this allure of I'm this important person get to your head. Like, be guided by the actual dollars and cents of what's happening. Which brings me to step 4, which is monitor your cash flow. It seems pretty obvious, but really you have to watch it in terms of what's happening, and not just at the end of year at tax time and sort of go, oh, gee, fancy that, I made a loss this year. know what's happening, in your account, because then you will start to notice things. Then you'll start to notice whether strategies aren't working for you, or whether you need to pivot in different directions, or whether you're spending too much on services you don't need. So you really need to watch that. And there's no real alternative for that. Like, you can have a bookkeeper, you can have an accountant, but you yourself have responsibility of knowing what's coming in and what's going out, and knowing that process. And I guess that's one of the biggest risks, isn't it? And I'd love to hear from some of the people on here about your experiences managing cash flow. But that is a big risk that, faces small owners. My mum was a fashion designer for many years, and one of the huge issues in the fashion industry is this cash flow problem, because she had to commit to buying fabric, and a number of things, all the zips and buttons and so forth. She had to commit to buying them early. She'd then go ahead, so she'd commit to buying however many rolls of fabric or whatever she needed. She'd then design the outfits, she'd have a sample, she'd have a range, she'd sell them. And so people would commit to buying a certain amount, boutiques would commit to that. Then she would make them, she's got to pay the people who are making those outfits. Many of them were her staff members. Increasingly, she outsourced as well. So she's got to pay that. She then delivers them to the boutiques, and then they pay. And then sometimes, you can imagine, not everyone pays 7 days. In fact, that's pretty rare in that industry. It's usually more like 30 days, sometimes 60 days. Sometimes boutiques go out of business. We're seeing a lot of that with retail right now. So you can imagine, in that industry, cash flow is a real issue, because you've got, quite a significant outlay from when you begin to first buy, the equipment, the materials, paying your staff, but you don't get paid later. In my business as a freelance writer, I'm not doing quite as much at the moment, but I'm still doing some freelance writing. It can be 6 to 8 weeks from when I first write something to when I invoice to when I get paid, because I would usually invoice at the end of the month, and so I might have written something in the first week of the month, and then it'll usually be 2, 3, sometimes 4 weeks until I get paid. So that's a significant gap, and something I have to be aware of as well. Hi, Patricia. Patricia said cash flow is tricky and can be lumpy due to client demand, etc. Exactly. It's a lot more lumpy, isn't it? It's a lot less lumpy than when you've got a solid salary to go for. Moving on, tip number 5, all the little things matter. Just like with your own finances, for managing, say, your grocery budget or anything else, all the little things matter. And so that means things like subscriptions, for subscription services. I tend to, because I'm in the digital space, I tend to, try different things, and then it's quite easy for me to forget to turn them off at the end of the month and end up paying for them. But realistically, I need a lot of things, like, for podcast hosting, I need podcast hosting services, I need website hosting services, I need Zoom. There's quite a lot of different things. But, with all of those, I tried out different free versions first before I committed to paying for them long term. And so try and do that as much as possible, and just try and be ruthless about it. Just because you're in business doesn't mean you need absolutely everything. Like, I didn't sign up for Zoom until my first course, because up to then I could do the free version of Zoom, and it wasn't really until I had a course that was going, for an hour and a half, 2 hours, that I knew that I couldn't sustain that with the free version of Zoom. I didn't want to be cutting out halfway through. But had I looked around, there were probably other cheaper things I could have done. But all those things matter. Your energy usage matters. If you buy a new computer, all those things matter. And so try and, for want of a better word, bootstrap it as much as possible in the early days, and just monitor those things. Just because you're a business and you're ultimately going to need those things in the future doesn't mean that you need them now. Work out what you actually, just keep a track of all those little things. And as you monitor your cash flow, that'll help too. And number 6, keep all your receipts and have a bill payment system. So once again, don't just wait for tax time and suddenly go, oh yeah, where are these receipts for things? Have a system in place. So I have a very basic paper-based system in addition to my online system that I just wanted to share. Now, this is not perfect by any means, but it works. And even hubby this morning was trying to find something, and he just sort of went straight to the folder. He knew where it was, and it works. So this is my bill paying folder for last year. So you can see we're quite clear on this. I purposely don't call it a bill folder. I call it a wealth folder because I believe in, creating wealthy things. And then, all your thoughts and actions create how you are. And you can see, well, not very well, but you can see I've got this, spreadsheet with different things on here. I've got a list of bills, the amount, the due date paid, how I paid, and comments. And I like to call mine Hey Bill. It's a bit of a joke, family joke, because I grew up in Noosa where they had this guy called Bill who used to have this little card on the beach, which he called Hey Bill. My mum and stepdad knew Bill, and they've actually got a painting featuring Bill in their home. So Hey Bill really resonates for me because it brings up images of my childhood growing up in Noosa Heads. But I've got, different positive messages on it. I've got every day and every way. We are becoming more and more prosperous. So rather than, I've got to pay the bills, this is a positive thing for me. But at the back of this, you can see I've got a whole lot of receipts. Now, basically, I keep receipts for everything that I think might be claimable, and it's up to my tax accountant to then, work out what is actually claimable. Now, I'm not suggesting that anyone avoid tax or make false claims. What I'm just saying is every time you've got a legitimate tax expense, something you think is going to be a legitimate tax expense, keep the receipts. For instance, I do a lot of recipe creation for Australia's Best Recipes. I didn't even think of this until a couple of months in. I think I'd been writing for them for about 3 months, and it was Christmas, and I was grumbling because the editor had asked me specifically to create a recipe of something that I wouldn't necessarily have eaten in my family, and some of the ingredients were a bit more expensive than things I would normally eat. And I was sort of grumbling about it, and I went, hang on, this is actually a legitimate business expense. Like, the editor has asked me to create this particular recipe. I'm going to invoice her for payment at the end. So the ingredients that I use in that are actually a legitimate expense. So now I keep all the receipts of things that are inputs into the recipes that I create. Now, I'm not suggesting that I feed my family by avoiding tax based on this. I don't put my whole food budget for the week through this process because that would be lying and that would be being a tax cheat, but that's what I do. And same with my Airbnb, because I have an Airbnb. So if I buy toilet paper for the Airbnb, I keep the receipt and I claim that because that is the legitimate, well, I believe. If anyone here is a tax accountant and knows whether this is to be true or not, I'm sure you'll let me know. But I do believe it's a legitimate tax expense. However, if I was buying those things for my own personal use and didn't really have an Airbnb or wasn't delivering it for Airbnb, that would be fraudulent. And there can be a fine line with this sometimes. But when in doubt, I believe that ethical values will, come through again and again. And if you're audited by the tax office, which does happen, and I think it's going to be happening increasingly more, it's really important to have all of those receipts. So make sure you do that. And with that too, also, make sure you do understand what, the tax guidelines are. Like I said, I've got a good tax accountant, so I rely on him. But the ATO does have some really, really good online resources for small businesses that will give advice on what's allowable and not. I do follow them on Facebook, and I get their emails, and sometimes it's really useful. Just, useful tips on what to do for what is actually allowable. In terms of things like work clothing, there was a time when they were really cracking down on that. Equipment, working from home, all those sorts of things. So, you're aware of those things because, like you can see, I'm working from home. So, there are certain expenses that I can claim from that, but I can't claim everything because that, once again, wouldn't be quite true or accurate. So it's a matter of balancing those things. But just keep your receipts and be really clear what they are, and that will stand you in good stead at tax time. Number 7. Online accounting software. Now, I didn't have accounting software for a long time. I was just issuing manual invoices based on Excel spreadsheeting, and I did that quite happily for thinking about a year and 18 months, and that worked fine. As someone who was bootstrapping, that was quite okay. And that suited my purposes. I wasn't issuing that many invoices, so I knew when I issued one out, it had all the relevant information on it, and it didn't cost me very much to do it, and then they would pay into my bank account, and that was fine. Now that I've sort of wanted to put in place a few more things once I left work, I now have an online accounting system. So I looked at Xero, and they're not bad. They're about $50 a month. So instead, I've got another system called SASU, SASSUU, which my sister, who's a bookkeeper, recommended, and that's $15 a month. So that's a lot cheaper. The only drawback is it's really designed for professional accountants in mind, so I don't fully understand all of the functionality yet. It's something I need to learn, but the idea is that once I learn that, that will really make my bookkeeping functions a lot easier and make it easier at tax time. Certainly makes it a lot easier in terms of issuing invoices, and the contact information is saved there, so that's fine. But use whatever you're comfortable, and at the stage at which you're comfortable using something. If we have any people who are using particular online accounting systems or spreadsheet systems, I'd really love to hear what you're doing, because real life stories of what people actually do versus what you think you should be doing, I think are really important. So that's really good. Tip number 8, grants. Now my sister, actually, I asked her, my sister who's the bookkeeper, her name is Springbird. If you're watching this later, Spring, I value your advice very much. And she reminded me of the importance of grants. And I don't know why I didn't even think of that, even though I'm applying for grants myself, and even though I have experience previously of managing grants when I managed the Australia-China Council Secretariat. So, key thing to remember with grants is grants are really important if you get one for growing your business. And it's not just the money, it's also the credibility. Like with the Australia-China Council, which has been abolished, by the way, and been replaced by a multi-million-dollar replacement. I wish I was still managing it there in a way, although it's in quite a different form. But years ago, when I was managing what was then the Australia-China Council, the grant money was only between $5,000 and $40,000. And I was really surprised that some of the grantees were just so excited by this money. For example, the Australian Ballet was fabulously excited, and I remember being invited to this afternoon tea where I got to meet some of the ballet dancers and got a behind-the-scenes look at the costume department, and they were really falling over themselves to talk to me. And I thought, well, this is crazy in a way, because we're only giving small amounts of money, and there's some philanthropists here who are giving much, much more than us. But what I realised was that they were doing tours to China, and having the cachet of having Australian government support was just so important in terms of opening the doors for other forms of philanthropy. And also, it gave them a sense of credibility too. It opened up doors in terms of venues, in terms of support from the embassy and other things. So grants are really significant, not just in terms of the money, but because you can say to others, look, I'm really credible. I've got this grant. This shows that I have support for my concept and I'm going places. But be aware with the grant, because you do have to spend it, and you do have to spend it wisely. You often have to have matching money of your own for the grant, and it often has to be for a new proposal, not for your ongoing business. So if you thought the grant was to give you personally a salary, well, it probably isn't. You probably can't use it for that at all. And you actually do have to think about how you can grow your business in other ways to accommodate that grant money. And you have to be really, really accountable for that, especially if it's government money. You really have to account for every single cent about how you spent it and what it's been done, what you've used it for. So just be aware of that. It's fabulous, but it's just not necessarily going to solve all your business problems, especially if there's cash flow problems. Be careful when applying not to just cut and paste. As someone who has been involved in shortlisting, assessing, reading grants in the past, you can tell when someone's just cutting and pasting the same application that's failed previously into another one. And that is a hard thing, particularly people in creative industries where you don't have a lot of time, and it is difficult, especially when they're long application processes. But really, you can tell you're just wasting your time if you're just cutting and pasting. And also get to know the organisation you're applying for. I mean, if you've never really had anything to do with them, you don't know anything about them at all, you don't follow them on Facebook or LinkedIn or anything else, and you just suddenly crop up and go, hi, I want money, it's sort of it's sort of not really genuine. Like, it's actually ideal when they know you and what you're doing as well. And it's a hard call because, I used to have lots of people wanting meetings with me to sell themselves, and you're busy and you don't want to be bothered by them. But, like I said, one good thing is to join their community and comment on their posts, and they slowly get to know you and you build up your credibility with them. For instance, at the moment, I'm doing a lot of things with the Canberra Innovation Network, who I think are fabulous, and I do that, I do that anyway. But if I'm applying for things with them in the future, they now know who I am rather than if I hadn't attended things. So just keep that in mind. If you want money for grants, try and build up a long-term relationship, a genuine, authentic long-term relationship if you can. Tip number 9, retain key customers. This is another tip from my lovely sister who pointed out that depending on how you get your customers, advertising and getting them is a very, very costly thing. So the best thing is to retain key customers. Now, I did this a little bit with my Airbnb. We had a lot of cancellations. I think I had about 14 cancellations in a very short period of time in March in COVID, and I had, I can't even remember how many in January due to the smoke haze. Now, it's really tempting because, I was pretty upset about it. I had a lady in Kazakhstan who was in tears because she couldn't get back to Canberra during COVID, and she was having a bit of a breakdown on the phone. And it's really tempting to just sort of go, look, not my problem, I don't want to deal with this, or, I'm, deserved a certain amount, insisting on my full rights, as the owner, or wanting to get this back or that back. But I sort of went, you know what? It's about doing the right thing here, and it's about the long-term relationships I have with my Airbnb customers. So that in all of my communications, I was like, look, I'm really sorry to hear about that you can't come to Canberra during a global pandemic. I totally understand that. It's not a problem. Look forward to hosting you in future. And guess what? Already I'm seeing people come back because they value that relationship. And certainly, the relationships I have with the existing people is and they're good guests, They're not unknown guests who have never stayed at Airbnb before. They are lovely people who appreciate my hospitality. They go the extra mile. They treat my premises with respect, and they're fabulous. So, it is really worth looking after your key customers and asking how they are, particularly in these difficult times. Not to, necessarily push your product, but just, it's just to show a bit of empathy and a bit of caring about where they are, because it'll make a huge difference to your credibility and your brand in the long run. If you're there when times are tough, they'll be there for you when times are good. At least that's the hope. And the 10th and final one, and I'm conscious of the time, is good advice. Getting the right advice, including things like training courses, legal advice, accounting advice, business advice, can save you a fortune in the long run. I don't know the amount of people I've met who have not set up their companies in the right way, or have gone, particularly in terms of things like business structures such as partnerships, without having appropriate things in place, and it's gone belly up and it's just been a mess. Intellectual property is another one. Like, you haven't trademarked what was a key name or idea or patent, and then you've got issues because you haven't trademarked. It's really worth investing in that good advice first before you even go anywhere, because it is hard, because you don't want to spend all your money when you're starting up getting lots of really, really expensive legal advice. But, just even asking the question of others about where they got that advice. And sometimes there's ways in startups that you can get some, credible advice online, at least in the first instance, or, just get some basic advice and take the rest from there. But, just make sure you do get that stuff, because otherwise it can end up costing you a lot more down the track if you're not really sure of what you're doing. An example is with the Joyful Business Club. My long-term ambition is to set up a peer-to-peer lending mechanism. Now, that is governed very much by ASIC, the Australian Securities and Investment Commission, I think is the C, and they have very strict rules about what is appropriate for lending. I wouldn't even dream of starting the software until I had made sure that I would be fully compliant with their obligations, because the risk, if you didn't do that properly and then you're investigated and found to be I won't even say, bad, but, you can imagine, and you're shut down. The reputational risk, even though it might have been intentional, even though there might have been any damage, you can imagine people thinking, oh, well, I wouldn't invest with her, she's fraudulent. Versus, oh, yes, her, the Joyful Business Club is a credible organisation that is fully compliant with necessary regulation and legislation, and they know what they're doing, and I feel confident that my money would be invested properly and would go to supporting the causes, in this case supporting women in business, that it says it will. Fabulous. Well, they're my 10 tips. Thank you so much for listening. As I mentioned in the beginning, I run a course called 6 Weeks to Abundance with the Joyful Frugalista. The next course starts on the 3rd of August. It's run over 6 weeks with Zoom meetings, worksheets, and also a private Facebook group. One of the weeks in that deals specifically with careers, side hustles, and finding your dream businesses. And it was quite amazing in the last course, the amount of ladies who were on that course who had some really interesting things that they were thinking about doing. They were at that stage where they were ready to make a leap of faith into doing some really special things. And it was such an honour as a facilitator to really bear witness to some of their plans that they had. And it's one of the reasons I'm so passionate about small group courses, is it's not just me talking at people, it's about everyone sharing, and there's something really magical when you get groups and circles, particularly of women, where they support each other. That's my wish also for the Joyful Business Club, but with the 6 Weeks to Abundance course, it's really, really evident because it's in quite a private setting. And when you hear someone saying, well, I negotiated a better deal with my bank, or this is what's happened for me in terms of my abundance mindset and how it shifted for me, and this is what's happened, and this is how much money I've saved, it's really quite phenomenal. Before I sign off, are there any further questions from all the lovely people who are on here today about frugal tips for business success? Is there anything that you do personally that really works for you? Any ways that you get freebies or other things that help you in your early stage of your business? Any things you've tried that have really worked? What kind of online software do you use? Do you use any at all? Do you feel bad because you think you should be using some online accounting software but you don't? Like I said, I didn't for a long time and I survived fine. And even the stuff that I have now, I don't fully understand the functionality, but that will come with time. And when I'm ready to hand over to a bookkeeper, it should also make it a little bit easier, hopefully. Anything further? Well, in that case, thank you all so very much for your time. And I hope this was useful and wish you all the very best for business success in the future.